A blessed day for each and everyone. My name is Antoinette Ibay Tabago, BEd 32, and my report is Speaking to Inform under the Chapter 13. So first, let us know the objective of this module. So at the end of the lesson, you should be learn about the four types of informative speeches, three methods to avoid abstractions, and the importance of personalizing ideas. So, informative speech. In one survey, graduates from US colleges were asked to rank the speech skills most important to their jobs. They rated informative speaking as number one. In another survey, 62% of the respondents said that they use formative speaking almost constantly. So, in public speaking to inform occurs in a wide range of everyday situation. So, for example, the business manager explains next year's budget. So, another example, the architect reviews plan for a new building. And another example is the union leader informs members about a new contract. There are endless situations in which people need to inform others. Competence in this form of communication will prove valuable to the to your to your throughout your life. So for example, one of your first classroom assignments probably will be to deliver an informative speech in which you will act as a lecturer or teacher. You may describe an object, show how something works, report on a report an event, or explain a concept. Your aim will be to convey knowledge and understanding, not to advocate a cause. So your speech will be judged in light of three general criteria. So first, is the information communicated accurately? Is the information communicated clearly? Or is the information made meaningful and interesting to the audience? So in this chapter, we will look at four types of informative speeches and the basic principles of informative speaking. Along the way, we will apply various general principles discussed in previous chapters. So the four types of informative speeches are: first, speeches about objects; second, speeches about process; third, speeches about event; and fourth, speeches about concept. So there are many ways to clarify informative speeches. Here we focus on the kinds you are most likely to give in your speech class. So first, speeches about objects. It speeches about object is visible, tangible, object understandable in form. So object may have moving parts or be alive. They may anything that is visible include places, structures, animals, and even people. So here are examples of subject that is tangible and standable in form. So first, Grand Canyon, the human eye, seaweed, comic strip, stock market, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, GPS navigation devices, and US Army. You will not have time to tell your classmate everything about any of these subject. Instead, you will choose a specific purpose that is focused on one aspect of your subject. Working from the topic presented above, the following are examples of the good specific purposes statement for informative speeches about object. So first, to inform my audience about the geological features of the Grand Canyon. Second, to inform my audience about the role of Elizabeth Cady Stanton in the U.S. Women's Rights Now. And third is to inform my audience what to look for when buying a GPS navigation devices. Notice how precise these statements are. As we saw in Chapter 4, you should select a specific purpose that is not too broad to achieve in the allotted time. So if your specific purpose is to explain the history or evolution of your subject, you will put your speech in chronological order. So for example, your specific purpose is to inform my audience about the major achievement of Frederick Douglass. So your central idea would be, although born in slavery, Frederick Douglass became one of the greatest figures in American history. And your main points are, Douglass spent the first 20 years of his life as a slave in Maryland. Second, Douglass escaping to the North. Douglass became a leader in the abolitionist movement to end slavery. And third, during the Civil War, Douglass helped establish black regiment in the Union Army. And fourth, after the war, Douglass was a tireless champion of equal rights for his race. If your specific purpose is to describe the main features of your subject, you may organize your speech in spatial order. So, for example, your specific purpose is to inform my audience about the design of the St. Louis Arc. So your central idea would be the St. Louis Arc is divided into 3 sections, each with its own attraction. So your main points are, the base of the St. Louis Arc houses a visitor center with a museum, 2 movie theater, and retail outlet. Second, the middle of the St. Louis Arc contains a high-speed tram that carries visitors from the base to the top. And third, the top of the St. Louis Arc has an observation desk 630 feet above the ground. So as often as not, you will find that speeches about objects fall into topical order. So for example, your specific purpose is to inform my audience about the 4 major elements of a Japanese garden. So your central idea would be, the 4 major elements of a Japanese garden are stone, sand, water, and plants. And the main points are, the first element of a Japanese garden is stone, which symbolize mountains and islands. Second, the second element of a Japanese garden is, which symbolize the sea or other vast areas. The third element of Japanese garden is water, which symbolize purity and life. While the fourth element of a Japanese garden is plants, which symbolize life and the changing season. No matter which of these organizational methods you use, chronological, spatial, or topical order, be sure to follow the guideline discussed in Chapter 8, which is first, limit your speech to between 2 and 5 main points. 2. Keep main points separate. 3. Try to use the same pattern of wording for all main points. And 4. Balance the amount of time devoted to each point or main point. So next, we have speeches about process. A process is a systematic series of action that leads to a specific result or product. Speeches about process explain how something is made, how something is done, or how something works. Here are examples of good specific purpose statement for speeches about processes. So first is to inform my audience how hurricane developed. Second is to inform my audience how to write an effective job resume. And third is to inform my audience how US currency is made. So we have two kinds of informative speeches about process. So first we have one kind explain a process so that the listener will understand it better. Your goal is to have your audience know the steps of the process and how they relate to one another. So if your specific purpose is to inform my audience how underwater robots works, you will explain the basic task and mechanism of underwater robots. You will not instruct your listeners on how they can operate an underwater robots. So next, the second kind of speech explains so that the listeners will be better able to perform the process themselves. Your goal in this kind of speech is to have the audience learn a skill. Suppose your specific purpose is to inform my audience how to use or how to take pictures like a professional photographer. You will present photographic techniques and show your listeners how they can utilize them. You want the audience to be able to use the techniques as a result of your speech. Both kinds of speeches about processes may require visual aids. At the very least, you should prepare a chart outlining the step or techniques of your process. In some cases, you will need to demonstrate the steps or techniques by performing them in front of your audience. When, when informing about the process, you will usually arrange your speech in chronological order, explaining the process step by step from beginning to end. So, for example, your specific purpose is to inform my audience about major rituals of a traditional Bengali wedding in India. So your central idea supposed to be a traditional Bengali wedding consists of a series of rituals that take place before, during, and after the wedding ceremony. And your main point are first, pre-wedding rituals includes giving gift to the bride and groom and dressing the bride in traditional fashion. Second, rituals during the wedding ceremony include an exchange of garland between the bride and groom, the chanting of mantras, and the giving away of the bride by her uncle. And third, the post-wedding rituals include the celebration of the home of the bride's family, a reception at the home of the groom's family, and the formal exit of the bride and groom. So sometimes, rather than moving through a process step by step, you will focus on the major principles or technique involved in performing the process. Then you will organize your speech in topical order. Each main point will deal with a separate principle or technique. So for example, your specific purpose is to inform my audience of the common method used by stage magicians to perform their tricks. So your central idea should stage magicians use two common methods to perform their tricks: mechanical devices and sleight of hand. So your main point are first, many magic tricks rely on mechanical devices that may require little skill by the magician. Second, other magic tricks depends on the magician's skills is fooling people by the sleight of hand manipulation. So next, concise organization is especially important in speeches about processes. You must make sure each step is clear and easy to follow. If your process has more than 4 or 5 steps, group the step into unit to limit the number of the main point. So for example, in a speech explaining how to set up a home aquarium, a student presented the following main point. So the main point is, first you must choose the size of your tank, then you must determine the shape of your tank. You must also decide how much you can afford to pay the tank for a tank. Once you have a tank, you need the filter system. A heater is also absolutely necessary. You must also get an air pump. Once this is done, you need to choose gravel for the tank. You will also need plants. Next, other decoration will round out the effect of your aquarium. Now you are ready to add the fish. Freshwater fish are the most common, and saltwater fish are more expensive and requires special care. So not surprisingly, this was too much for the audience to follow. The speakers should have organized the points something like this. So the first step is establishing a home aquarium is choosing a tank. So the sub-main point of this are the size of the tank is important, the shape, and the cost of the tank. Second, the second step in establishing a home aquarium is equipping the tank. So you will need a filter system, a heater, air pump, gravel, plants, and other decoration. So for the third step in establishing a home aquarium is adding the fish. So freshwater fish are the most common for home aquarium, while the saltwater fish are more expensive and require special care. The sub-points cover the same territory as the original 12 points, but 3 main points are much easier to understand and remember. So next, speeches about event. So the Random House Dictionary defines an event as anything that happens or is regarded as happening. By this definition, the following are examples of suitable subjects for the informative speeches about event: mountain climbing, civil rights movement, job interviews, Cinco de Mayo, tsunami, attention deficit disorder, Battle of the Light Bighorn. So as usual, you will need to narrow your focus and pick a specific purpose you can accomplish in a short speech. So here are examples of good specific purpose statement for informative speeches about event. So first is to inform my audience of the festivities at Mexico's Cinco de Mayo celebration. So next, to inform my audience about what happened at the Battle of Little Bighorn. So there are many ways to discuss events. If your specific purpose is to recount the history of an event, you will organize your speech in chronological order, relating the incidents one after another in the order they occurred. So for example, your specific purpose is to inform my audience about the history of Paralympics. So your central idea would be Olympic-style games for athletes with physical disabilities have made great strides since the first competition more than 60 years ago. So your main points are, first, what would eventually become the Paralympics began in 1948 with the sport competition in Great Britain involving the World War II veterans with spinal cord injuries. So second, in 1952, the event expanded when athletes from the Netherlands took a part. So the number 3, the first official Paralympic Games for international athletes took place in Rome in 1960. So you can approach an event from almost any angle or combination of angles, features, origins, implications, benefits, future develop, and so forth. So in such cases, you will put your speech together in topical order, and you should make sure your main points subdivide the subject logically and consistently. For instance, your specific purpose is to inform my audience about three aspects of the Mardi Gras celebration, New Orleans. So your central idea would be the Mardi Gras celebration in New Orleans is renowned for its parades, costume, and foods. So your main points, the parades are live events that takes place over the course of several weeks. Second, the costume includes discussed medallions and the official Mardi Gras color of purple, green, and gold. So third, the food features Cajun and Creole dishes common to South Louisiana. So next, speeches about concepts. Concepts include belief, theories, ideas, principles, and the like. They are more abstract than objects, processes, or events. So the following are examples of subjects for speeches about concepts: Confucianism, string theory, philosophies of education, principles of feminism, origin intent, original intent doctrine, existentialism, numerology, and human rights. Taking a few of these general subjects, here are some specific purpose content concept statements for speeches about concept. So first, to inform my audience about the basic principle of Confucianism. Next is to inform my audience about the doctrine of original and constitutional interpretation, and to inform my audience about the different philosophies of education in Europe and the United States. So speeches about concepts are usually organized in topical order and focus on the main features or aspect of your concept. So for example, your specific purpose is to inform my audience about the basic principles of nonviolent resistance. So your central idea, the basic principles of nonviolent receive stance stress using moral means to achieve a social changes, refusing to inflict violence on one's enemies, and using suffering as a social force. So your main points, the first major principles of nonviolent resistance is the social change must be active by moral means. Next, the second major principle of nonviolent resistance is the one should not inflict violence on one's enemies. So the third major principles of nonviolent resistance is that suffering can be a powerful social force. So another approach is to define the concept you are dealing with, identify its major elements, and illustrate it with specific example. So an excellent instance of this came in a student speech about Islam. So your specific purpose should be to inform my about audience of the basic principles of Islam. So your central idea, the belief of Islam can be traced to be or to the Prophet Muhammad, are written in Quran and have produced a number of sects. So your main points. First is Islam was founded by the Prophet Muhammad in the early 605. So next is the teaching of Islam are written in Quran, the holy book of Islam. So your third main points are today, Islam is divided into a number of sects, the largest of which are the Sunnis and the Shiites. So speeches about concept are often more complex than other kinds of informative speeches. When dealing when dealing with concept, pay, pay special attention to avoid technical language, to define terms clearly, and to using example and comparison to illustrate the concept. Now let us proceed on guidelines for informative speaking. All the previous chapters of this book relate to the principles of informative speaking. Selecting a topic and specific purpose, analyzing the audience, gathering materials, choosing support details, organizing the speech, using words to communicate meaning, delivering the speech. All much must be done effectively if an informative speech is to be a success. Here we emphasize the 5 additional points that will help make your success. So first, do not overestimate what the audience knows. So as many speakers have discovered it easy to overestimate the audience stock of information. You cannot assume that they will know what you mean. Always consider whether it will be clear to someone who is hearing about the topic for the first time. So, as many speakers have discovered, it is easy to overestimate the audience stock of information. In most informative speeches, your listeners will be only visually knowledgeable about the details of your topic. You cannot assume they will know what you mean. Rather, you must be sure to explain everything so truly that they cannot help but understand. As you work on your speech, always consider whether it will be clear to someone who is hearing about the topic for the first time. So, for example, in a speech about meteorology, a student said if modern methods of weather forecasting had existed in 1900s, the Galveston hurricane disaster would never have taken place. Then he was off to other matters, leaving his listeners to puzzle over what the Galveston hurricane was, when it happened, and what kind of destruction it wreaked. The speaker assumed his audience already knew these things, but they were not expert on meteorology or on American history. Even those who had heard of the hurricane had only fuzzy notion of it. Only the speaker knew that the hurricane, which killed more than 6,000 people when it unexpectedly struck on September 8, 1900, is still the deadliest natural disaster in American history. So next, relate the subject directly to the audience. It is the speaker's job to get listeners interested and to keep them interested. Informative speakers have one big hurdle to overcome. Nothing interests people more than themselves. So speakers have been known to give such or much the same answer as saying face after this dismal informative speech. Oh, they say, the speech was fine, but the audience just wasn't interested. And they are at least partly right. The audience wasn't interested. But there is no such thing as a fine speech that puts people to sleep. It is the speaker's job to get listeners interested and to keep them interested. So informative speaker must have one big hurdle to overcome. They must recognize that what is fascinating to them may not be fascinating to everybody. Once you have chosen a topic that could possibly be interesting to your listeners, you should take special steps to relate it to them. You should tie it in with their interests and concerns. Start in introduction, but do not stop with the introduction. Whenever you can, put your listeners into the body of your speech. After all, nothing interests people more than themselves. Find ways to talk about your topic in terms of your listeners. Bring your materials home to them. Get it get it as close to them as possible. So next, do not be too technical. Any subject can be popularized but only up to a point. The important thing for a speaker to know is what can explain to an ordinary audience and what cannot. What does it mean to say that an informative speech is too technical? It may mean the subject matter is too specialized for the audience. Any subject can be popularized, but only up to a point. The important thing for a speaker to know is that can be explained to an ordinary audience and what cannot. Say your subject is electronic amplifiers. It is no trick to demonstrate how to operate an amplifier, how to turn it on and off, adjust the volume, set the tone and balance control. It is also relatively easy to explain what an amplifier does. It boosts the sound received from a radio, CD player, or live performance. But to give a full scientific account of how an amplifier works cannot be done in any reasonable time unless the audience knows the principle of audio technology. The material is just too technical to be understood by a general audience. So even when the subject matter is not technical, the language used to explain it may be. Every activity has its jargon, whether it be golf, bougie, wedge, match play, chemistry, or financial analysis. If you are talking to a group of specialists, you can use technical words and be understood. But you must do all you can to avoid technical words when informing a general audience, such as your speech class. Here, for instance, are two statements explaining stem cells and the roles they can play in the human body. The first is heavily laden with specialized language that would have little impact on ordinary listeners. So, most multicellular organism contains stem cells that reinvigorate themselves through the process of mitotic cellular division. Stem cells in early embryos represent basic units of life in higher organisms, while adult stem cells in semantic tissues represent cellular stores capable of regenerating tissues and maintaining organ function. Both are characterized by unique properties that permit accurate in vivo cell copying. So the second statement is perfectly understandable and show how technical information can be made clear to the average person. So according to the National Institute of Health, stem cells are general cells that have the potential to develop into any of the more than 200 different cells in the human body. Basically, they turn into a cell that has a specific job to do. So for example, a stem cell might become muscle cells that help rebuild damaged tissues. They might become red blood cells that help deliver oxygen to different tissues, or they might become brain cells that help the nervous system function. No matter become brain cell that helps the nervous system function, no matter what types of cells need assistance. Stem cells can come to the rescue and replenish the cells in our body needs. So the Genetic Learning Center of the University of Utah explained it like this. Stem cells are like actors waiting for a casting call. Just an actor waiting to find out his or her next role. Stem cells wait for signal from the body that tells them what to become. Once they get those signal, they begin to change into specific cell with a specific job to do. Much clearer it is not. The only specialized word in the whole passage are stem cells. The rest of the language is straightforward. The ideas easy to grasp. This is what you should strive for in your informative speeches. So next we have avoid abstractions. My task is before all to make you see, said by novelist Joseph Conrad. My task, said the novelist Conrad, is before all to make you see, and make the reader see is just what Conrad did. So witness this passage in which Conrad describes the aftermath of an explosion aboard a ship. The first person I saw was Mahon, with eyes like saucers, his mouth open, and the long white hair standing straight on end round his neck like a silver halo. He was just about to go down when the sight of the main deck string heaving up and changing into splinters before his eyes petrified him on the top step. I stared at him in unbelief, and he stared at me with a queer kind of shocked curiosity. I did not know what my face was black, one cheek laid open, my nose cut, and my chin bleeding. A speech is not a novel. Still, many informative speeches would be vastly improved by the novelist's bend for color, specificity, and detail. One way to avoid abstraction is through description. When we think of description, we usually think of external events such as the explosion described by Conrad. But description is also used to communicate internal feeling. So here is how one student tried to convey to his audience the sensations he experienced when he first began skydiving. So as we wait for the plane to climb to the jump altitude of 12,000 feet, my mind races with a frenzied jumble of thoughts. Okay, this is the moment you've been waiting for. It's going to be great. Am I really going to jump out of an airplane from 12,000 feet? What if something goes wrong? Can I still back out? Come on, don't worry, it will be fine. So even if we have not been skydiving, we still all had the same kinds of emotion on similar occasion. So what happened next? So now it's time to jump. My palms are sweating and my heart is pounding so hard I think it may burst. Get ready, yells the instructor. As I jump into the blue, I wonder, what am I doing here? So yes, and then what? The blast of air resistance blows me backward like a leaf at the mercy of an atom wind. In about 10 seconds, my body levels out and accelerates to speed of 120 miles an hour. The air supports my body like an invisible flying carpet. There is no sound except for the wind rushing around my face. The earth appears soft and green. Rivers look like strips of silver, and in every direction the scenery forms a panoramic landscape. Any fears or doubts I had been gone in the exhilaration of free flight. Every nerve in my body is alive with sensation. Yet I am overcome by peaceful feeling and sense that I am at one with the sky. So as we listen to the speaker, we share his thoughts, feel his heart pound, and join his exhilaration as he floats effortlessly through the sky. The vivid description lends reality to the speech and draws us further in. So next, personalize your ideas. Listeners want to be entertained as they are being enlightened. Should try to personalize your ideas and dramatize them in human terms. So listeners want to be entertained as they are being enlightened. Nothing takes the edge of an informative speech more than an unbroken of facts and figures. And nothing enlives a speech more than personal illustrations. Whenever possible, you should try to personalize your ideas and dramatize them in human terms. So let us say you are talking about autism, the developmental disability marked by impaired communication and interaction skills. You would surely note that the condition affects 1 in every 500 children, occurs 4 times more than frequently in males than in females, and is most prevalent among Caucasians. You would also note that the symptoms of autism include abnormal introversion, severely limited use of language, repetitive behaviors, avoidance of eye contact, loss of emotional control, and passive responses to affection. But these are dry facts and figures. If you really want to get your audience involved, you will weave in some examples of children who suffer from autism. One speaker began by telling about Sam, her her autistic nephew. So here, my nephew Sam was the light of our family. When he was born, the first grandchild of my parent, he could he could and babbled, smiled at his mom and dad, grasped for the play things around his crib. At family dinner on Sunday, with two turns holding him in our arms, feeding him and singing him to sleep. He seems like any normal infant in a secure and loving home. Then, shortly before his second birthday, we began to notice unusual behaviors. Some avoided looking us in the eye, did not seem interested in learning words, played endlessly with the same toy, rocked back and forth in his chair for hours at the time, and was easily frustrated. My sisters, my sister took him to a specialist who gave a dreaded diagnosis. Sam has autistic. So during the body of the speech, the speaker mentioned Sam twice more to illustrate different aspects of autism. Then, at the end of the speech, she brought Sam's story to a hopeful conclusion. So, we have seen that autism is a very serious disorder whose causes are not well understood and whose effect on families and the lives of the children themselves can be devastating. But we have also seen that early diagnosis and early intervention can help to modify and even turn around the symptoms of autism. I am happy to say that some past benefit from such intervention. From the time he was 2, he has been taught normal behavior pattern through aggressive therapy. Now he is able to participate in his class at the local school. He is also more responsive and affectionate at home. Sam continues to be our delight. So it was a powerful ending by putting a human face on a familiar topic. The speaker took autism out of the realm of statistics and medical jargon and brought it home in personal terms. That's the end of my topic. Hope you learned something about it. So thank you for listening and God bless us all.